Hello, and welcome to the Feet on the Soil podcast, the podcast about the world beneath our feet and how we interact with it. Welcome back, guys, to another guest episode, and what feels like the first guest episode in a very long time. I have to admit, even when I was recording this one, I nearly forgot how to set up the microphone. I can only apologise for my complete inconsistency with this podcast this year. I'm in my final year of college, and a lot of work and effort is going into kind of dissertation, making sure that I graduate with a good degree, because God knows I really need it. But it's not really a good enough excuse, because I have to say I appreciate hugely the amount of support I've gotten for this podcast, and just start off the episode by saying a big thank you to everybody who's shared the podcast or talked about it with family and friends. I've gotten some really nice feedback even while I've been so inconsistent and not uploading nearly as much as I should. But apart from that, we have an episode today that I'm super happy to bring to you guys. It's an episode with a person I'd never thought I'd have on. It's a person I never thought that I'd really be interacting with and would call a friend of mine. But this episode, I'm chatting with Eoin Reardon. You might know Eoin better by his online name of Pint of Plain on TikTok and Instagram and YouTube. He is a traditional woodworker. He is a proud Corkman and a bit of a hidden environmentalist. Eoin's growth on TikTok has been somewhat explosive, gathering 5 million followers in a very short amount of time. But in this episode, I didn't want to talk to him about TikTok. I didn't want to talk to him too much about the online world whatsoever. I wanted to talk to him about the thing he loves the most, trees and woodworking. And so in this episode, we go into a variety of topics. We go into how Eoin made his start in woodworking, some of his experiences from his time at Bunratty Castle, which if you haven't seen the Bunratty Boys videos over on Eoin's TikTok, it's definitely something to see. I say in the episode that it almost feels like I've travelled back in time to see the TikTok account of a medieval craftsperson, and I really mean it. It's incredible to see on a platform which is so dictated by trends, something as ancient as the art of woodwork making a real way for itself. But we also speak about Ireland's native forestry, or lack thereof, and a little bit about the future of what we think of forestry in Ireland. Is rewilding the way, or should we look into more managed ways of managing our forests? All in all, I think there's something for everybody in this episode, and if you haven't heard of Eoin Reardon, I'm pretty sure that after this episode you're going to want to see more of him. So you can head on over to Pint of Plain on TikTok and Instagram. And one thing I would say is definitely to check out Eoin's YouTube account. I've talked about 2 of his videos in this podcast, both his kind of documentary about Eoin Dalton, which is fantastic viewing. Eoin Dalton, another incredible character of Ireland, someone who has taken it upon himself to bring back forestry instead of just talking the talk. And another video where Eoin documents the journey of 2 stonemasons in the rebuilding of a traditional Irish stone wall. Both of these videos really show Eoin's dedication to what he talks about. He's not just woodworking on TikTok and then going on his brand new iPhone and his new computer and living a digital life. He's someone who really lives what he says. I met Eoin on a classically grey Dublin day, and we recorded this episode in the Ivy Gardens, a really nice little spot that's known for its tranquility, but in the background you might hear some of the sounds of Dublin, a bit of construction, some seagulls, but I wouldn't let it distract you from the fantastic conversation that me and Eoin had. So I'm not going to hold you any longer. We're going to get straight into the conversation here, and we're starting by just exploring a little bit of Eoin's journey into getting into traditional woodcrafting. I hope you enjoy.
So, I suppose I first connected with traditional woodworking when I was about 18. I was around about the time I had gotten my first car, which meant I was able to drive around the place to all these old kind of car boot sales and visit people whose ads I'd seen on Dundee and buy old tools and fix them up. The reason I went for kind of the more traditional hand tools was because I couldn't afford the expensive power tools, and the project I had set in mind for myself was that I wanted to build a currach. So I was thinking maybe if I just got the bare essentials in the form of hand tools, cleaned them up, by the time I had gotten my collection built up, I could set about building a boat.
A lot of people can pick up a hobby if they're, if it's lockdown or something, you're finding something to do. Was there a history behind the reason you wanted to kind of dig into something that's so kind of tied to Irish kind of landscape and folklore as a currach? Like it's a big development to go from carving spoons to making your own boat for sailing Irish rivers. Do you know what I mean?
Well, I can't remember exactly what it was that had me obsessed, but I do remember being in secondary school. My handwriting was so bad, I had a laptop, which was very handy because when the teacher wasn't looking, I was able to, scour the internet for anything I could find on traditional currachs and then change tabs when they walked by. So I'd wanted to build one a few years before I set about doing it. I suppose I reckoned if people were doing them in these, poverty-struck areas of rural Ireland 100 years ago, it would be easy to do it now in 2020 at the time. I was wrong about that, but I got it done in the end.
And what were the kind of challenges that came up? Like, this was a kind of one of your first projects of woodworking, was it?
So I hadn't any formal woodworking training, didn't do it in school. I was purely going on what people had told me from conversations with old lads, whatever books I could find, and whatever internet forums. So it was a huge learning process. I remember cursing trying to bend oak to make the ribs. There's a wonderful bit of footage, I think filmed on the Aran Islands, of the boat builder, and he's steaming his oak lats in just a box full of straw, and he's pouring hot water he's boiled in a kettle over the ribs, and he's bending them, and he's making it look effortless. And I'm reminded of being in my parents' garden in the summer of 2020. Just every oak rib I went to bend just snapped in two, and there was multiple times you just had to give up and step away and come back another day, and I got it eventually.
And then obviously there you're talking about oak and working with oak wood, which is so tied to Irish culture. What was the kind of the development that happened there? Because now you have been posting a little bit more about native forestry in Ireland, not just about the kind of the work that you do after it's cut down. Was it a kind of a natural progress for you to start caring a little bit more about the trees of Ireland when you started working with them?
Absolutely, yeah. So the interest in woodwork definitely came before the interest in nature, but it definitely stemmed from the woodworking. You'd often hear people talk about going into the forests and looking for a specific shape of wood to use for a knee on the boat. Specific species of timber, for example, hazel, was often used for ribs in the place of oak. So yeah, there was definitely a kind of interest sparked from learning about traditional Irish woodworking. The next step is, okay, where are you getting those materials? And then finding out kind of the history of how those materials were once more abundantly available.
And has that become something that's important to you now when you're doing woodwork, about knowing the locality of where the wood's from, or knowing the kind of almost the story of the tree before it came onto your workbench?
Absolutely, yeah. People, I think, like when you sell them a piece of furniture, I think they like hearing the story of where the tree came from. And all trees, you'll find, do have some sort of story attached to them. There'll be someone talk about, oh, that branch came down in that storm, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Or it was planted whenever, because whatever,
And all of that, I suppose, is kind of the story of the piece. So, like you said at the start, you were using hand tools, and it started out of the necessity of not being able to get the power tools, but now it's become kind of your whole, I suppose, your brand nearly is that you're using these older tools. Is that something that's also to do with kind of being able to connect a bit more with the story of the wood itself, but then also the finished piece? It's a bit more hands-on than using power tools.
Absolutely. I think contemporary woodworking, let's say a joinery shop, you're using imported kiln-dried hardwoods that are in perfectly straight dimensions that you feed through loud machines, and you get a nice square even surface to join together to make your cabinet or your stairs or whatever. Green woodworking is totally different. The entire process is very hands-on and intimate, from going out into the woods or the hedgerows, finding a piece of wood that is suitable to the project you have in mind, cutting the timber down in winter when the sap has gone to the roots, so you don't have to wait so long for it to dry. You still have to wait, a year per inch of thickness, but that's all part of it too, seeing how the timber changes shape and warps as it dries out. And then once you do get to work with it, it's lovely to kind of take the bark off and work the timber down with all these hand tools. It's a very slow but satisfying process.
The whole thing that I get when I'm watching your videos is what you're saying there, the kind of the slow process of it. Even though it's on TikTok, which is, you know, very kind of choppy and fast paced, even in that medium, you can tell that everything that you're doing takes time, and it takes a lot of knowledge as well. And do you find that now that you have a little bit more of, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but a little bit more of kind of respect for trees and for the amount of time that goes in before you even ever touch it? Do you find that when you're out in, like you were saying, either the forests or even just browsing a hedgerow, do you look at it differently compared to how you did before you took into woodworking?
I think I often, when I go for walks at home, and I'm constantly now I'm looking into hedgerows, looking for pieces of timber, or just spotting, you know, fruits or animal tracks or some other things that I wouldn't have spotted before. And this is only happening in the last year or two. And I'm just thinking, how the hell, you know, I've been walking these roads for 24 years. How is it only in the last two that I've kind of had my eyes opened to this world of nature that exists just on my doorstep, you know?
It's kind of perfect that you say that, because one of the things I wanted to ask about is on my channel and on this podcast and everything, I talk a lot about rewilding, which is a term that I don't know if there's a better term, but it seems to be quite controversial. Some people don't like it because it's not really rewilding. You have to kind of manage things in a certain way. But you find that what you're doing is almost a kind of a rewilding of craft. Like it's in the same way that the rewilding of a landscape means you're getting away from those perfect lines of Sitka spruce. The craft that you're doing is kind of getting away from the perfect lines of that kiln-dried hardwood that you were saying. Do you see it as a kind of complementary to rewilding in the landscape?
Well, absolutely. The craft I do, which I suppose you could classify as green woodworking, as fun as it is to use kind of wild timbers that are growing bent or whatever in the hedgerows, for this craft to prosper in this country, we need managed woodland. We don't really have. We have a lot of, you know, Sitka spruce plantations. We have a small bit of monocrop broadleafs. But what we need is managed multiple species woodland. And I reckon that could, in a lot of ways, be more beneficial for wildlife and nature than, let's say, just letting a place go completely feral.
Yeah, it's interesting because you see it a lot now where rewilding kind of got loads of popularity and people were like, oh, I can basically just buy a couple acres and then just walk away and it'll be great. But then you see other people who are doing it a bit differently, the likes of Eoin Dalton, the likes of even kind of Quilch's close cover forestry programs, where they've realised, you know, it's not just about leaving it alone, it's about removing the invasive species, about removing kind of things that maybe shouldn't be there in a natural forest. So you are bringing it back to a wilder state, but you're kind of controlling that. I've seen it happen, obviously, like I said, with Eoin Dalton, and you were lucky enough to be on Eoin Dalton's land. We talked about it a little bit before, but what was the kind of experience of being in that like?
Oh, that was a truly remarkable experience. I don't think I'll ever forget it. But I suppose what Eoin Dalton has is probably the closest thing we could find in Ireland at the minute to a wild rainforest. And even then, it's a relatively young forest. There's no trees there that are kind of over 150 years old, I'd imagine. But one thing I observed was that all the trees were incredibly they looked wild. There wasn't a straight trunk to be found anywhere. It was just these wild looking twisty oaks and whatever else. And it made me think about what Ireland's rainforest used to look like when the first settlers were arriving onto this island, and what the forest looked like then. Because you do see a lot of kind of like pieces that come up, bog oak, and there you've got 20-foot lengths of needle straight trees resurfacing, and were they managing the woodlands, do you think, to a certain extent when they first arrived? Okay, let's clear out certain ways and allow this to grow in that kind of a way.
Yeah, I think I can't remember I can't remember the author. I think it was George Rackham. It was a book about the history of hedgerows, and it was talking about how the first kind of what we can consider hedgerows were essentially the edges of forests that were cleared by the first settlers in whatever nation it may be. And I think this one was specific to the UK. And it was also talking about the kind of the huge history of managed woodlands. So even coppicing hazel and kind of a little bit of hedgerow maintenance, a bit of hedgerow laying. Like that's from time immemorial. That's from way back into ancient history. So do you feel like you're kind of almost partaking in that? Like, do you ever get the feeling that you're kind of tapping into something that's a lot older than yourself?
Well, absolutely, especially when you use the old hand tools that have, you know, pitted and weathered in time. There's a nice connection to the people who used it before you. But we've fully broken the lineage in this country of woodland management. If you travel over to England, they've got, you know, generations of forest people who've continued that lineage of managing their woodlands over there. And once you lose that, you also lose the kind of the centuries of knowledge gained in time that comes with it. So in Ireland, we're really starting from scratch.
Yeah.
But I do get excited because I think we are at the beginning of kind of a wilderness managed woodland renaissance in this country.
And do you think that's kind of a similar story with the kind of the green woodworking, where there was kind of a generation where it broke off in favor of these kind of new tools? Do you see more than just yourself, other young people getting into this as a craft?
The reason green woodworking was kind of phased out was because economic factors. It couldn't compete with, industrialization. So I don't think it'll ever come back to that sense. But I do see a lot more young people getting into spoon carving, getting into chair making. So I do think as a hobby, there's huge potential for it to have a huge resurgence in the next couple of years.
Well, even I, over COVID, I bought a cheap spoon carving kit, and I was out in the back garden, and my mum gave out stink to me because I got like wood shavings all over the nice fresh cut grass. But even just in that little tiny bit of woodworking, like it came with the balsa wood, like it's not native oak that I was carving or anything like that. But even in that, I kind of got that feeling of like, you could almost imagine yourself at a fire in a forest, in the Neolithic period, carving a spoon, not because it was something, you were doing for fun. It was something that you had to do. Kind of getting back into that will have a kind of a knock-on effect. Do you think that if people kind of regain a respect for the skill and the time that goes into something, it kind of changes their perspective on other things?
If you've ever worked a piece of timber, you've gone carving it, you'll notice it's very kind of therapeutic, satisfying process. It's very repetitive, but you can find yourself just lost in thought, and I find anyway, I spend a lot of time reflecting on the material I'm working with. As I'm carving through the grain, I'm saying, okay, so the tree was kind of growing that way, and you're imagining the tree growing, you're imagining exactly where it came from. So it's definitely making me more mindful of where the material is coming from.
Most people who are going to listen to this, they would know you from either TikTok or Instagram or YouTube. And I suppose there's a big kind of difference there. Like I said, like TikTok and Instagram Reels, it's very short. You have to grab attention. Whereas what you're doing is almost the exact opposite of that. It can take, days or even years to allow the wood to dry before you even start on something. Do you think that people are kind of almost like craving something like that? Like even on a fast-paced short-form content platform, they're looking for something that takes time by watching you.
I think so. When I first started posting videos online, I was really surprised. I thought maybe I might grab the attention of a few other woodworkers, and to be a nice way to kind of make new friends or become part of this TikTok woodworking community. But I realized fairly quickly that most of my audience had never so much as swung a hammer. So at the start, people were saying, mostly Americans, oh, I like listening to the Irish accent. But those kind of phased out over time. And I do have a lot of Irish people, specifically men, watching. And they tend to watch the videos in their entirety. And it seems to resonate with them fairly well. And I do think it's this, they're longing for something that they don't have, but they remember their father or their grandfather working with old hand tools. I get that a lot when I meet people in public. Oh, your videos remind me of my grandfather. He used to do this. Or my dad downloaded TikTok because I had to show him this. So I do think it's people wanting a change. I think it is, that thing of slowing down and getting in touch with a lovely material and a slower pace of life with natural materials.
Yeah, because it is, it's almost a way of getting a taster of something like that. Like you're kind of scrolling along, and then all of a sudden you can slow down for a second to watch you make a shugan chair or something like. It's completely different from what came before it. And you brought up something interesting there, which is the fact that you do have a large American audience as well. Do you find in your experience that they're more so interested in the kind of the traditional woodworking aspect of it, or is it that you do sometimes bring in, whether it be kind of Irish folklore and kind of folk crafts? Is it more the Irish culture they're interested in, or the traditional woodworking that they're interested in?
What I find, and it's kind of upsetting, is that anytime I deviate from my normal content, which would be restoring a tool or making a bit of furniture or something like that, anytime I try to do something a little different, maybe more nature or culture or history orientated, my views drop off by like a factor of 10. So I guess it's something in the woodworking content
Okay.
people are drawn to.
Yeah.
But if I could figure out what that magic sauce is and apply that to my other videos, I would. So yeah, I think it's people like watching woodworking because it's satisfying. It's very kind of visual. Okay, he's using that chisel to slice off the wood. Oh, that's nice. Oh, now he's using a saw. Whereas anytime I make videos about, let's say, history or nature, there's nothing incredibly satisfying about watching a still video of a leaf on my hand.
Well, I disagree. I mean, I even like, because I've been following your page for a good while now, and I remember the first time, I think the first video that you posted about nature that I saw was the one about the cherry laurel cutting was that with the Gaelic Woodland project?
Yeah, so that was with the Gaelic Woodland project in Lisnava Estate in County Carlow. So they've got permission to go in there off the landowners, and they've got a huge native woodland in there, but it's absolutely destroyed with cherry laurel, which is just completely covered the understory of the woodland in this thick canopy of these leathery leaves. So we come in there, there's usually kind of volunteer groups of maybe 20, 30 people, and it's all hand tools. So we start with the pruning
Right up
saws
your
in the
alley.
morning, yeah, and it's just great crack to spend a day in the woods with other like-minded people, removing an invasive tree species, and yeah, it's just very rewarding to see the canopy completely clear up, all this light that the forest floor has just been yearning for, pouring out all along, and just seeing life come back into this desolate woodland.
And have you gone back to see any of those areas where you've done clearing out?
Well, I've only worked with the Gaelic Woodland project this year, and they're wrapped up now. So I think it'll probably be next spring before we start to see
Okay.
any results. But cherry laurel is a relentless
Oh my
plant.
God.
It requires eternal management. You'll never get rid of it all. You'll have to spend an eternity, removing it. And that's again part of this idea of rewilding with human assistance. If we fully step back and let nature do its thing, just get coated with cherry laurel again. In a couple hundred years, you'll just have this useless mono shrub. So it does require constant feet on the ground, feet on the soil.
That'll be my little tag now at the start. Well, it's very similar, cherry laurel. If people don't know cherry laurel, it is an invasive species here. And the main thing is, like you said, it's got these really thick, leathery leaves, and it just completely shades out any sort of light from dappling down onto the ground. So it prevents any sort of, understory growth. The other thing that most people will have heard of that's very similar is the rhododendron. I know, just because I was asking you about the clearing, there was a big council effort to clear a load of rhododendron from my area. And within about 6 months, you could see that, first of all, the rhododendron was coming back up. So, I mean, like you said, it's a continuous effort over time. But the other thing was that there was so much more coming up. So I was walking around, and ferns that had never been in the area were now like powering up to the sky. There was fungi coming up. There was loads of different ground story plants coming up, and all of that was within 6 months. Like it doesn't need like a huge effort. And I'm sure that a lot of the people that were at the clearing with you, it may have been their first time partaking in something like that. Like yourself, it was the first time.
So that was my first time, going in and volunteering with any group to do any sort of nature restoration project. But it was this incredible experience. It's just so nice to meet and talk to so many kind of like-minded people who are all passionate about Irish nature. You learn so much from the people there as well. It's a great workout, and there's usually a bit of a session or something afterwards.
That's what you need. So the other thing, the last time we were chatting about some of the tools that you've restored in the past, and I was asking you, do you ever look into the history of it? And you were saying how you do, and you love going into the history, but it might not make the most engaging short-form content. Was that something that you were interested in from the very start? Did you kind of, as soon as you got one of those old tools, you were looking up where it was made, how it was made, or did that come later on in the process?
No, that was more or less off the bat. But you're right, when you're very interested in something and you've got this huge amount of information, I find you have to be careful not to just dump it all on the person who's listening. So when I'm making my videos, specifically hand planes, I went on another kind of rabbit hole during COVID. I was obsessed with Stanley hand planes, and it's fascinating. They've been making those since the 1860s, and there's about 19 different types. So there's different features on each of them. So I was figuring out, okay, this was a pre-war one, and you can tell that because during the war they switched this to make it with rubber because there was a shortage of brass. There's a wealth of information there, but if I was kind of trying to get all this across on my TikToks, I think you'd alienate a lot of people. So it's a tricky thing to do.
Well, there might be more Stanley enthusiasts out there. And was it books that you were getting this from? Was it websites? Like where were you finding the information for this?
Mostly on American tool forums with
Okay.
like middle-aged men with just special interests in these vast collections of old tools.
And was there a specific tool that has become kind of your favorite, not because of its use, but just the story behind it?
Well, there's one saw in particular I have made by a company called Or Groves, and there's two interesting things I find about it. One is that the medallion, basically the brand that was stamped into the saw's handle, has been kind of scrubbed clean.
Okay.
And the reason I reckon that was because this would have been a fairly valuable tool to have. A good saw like this would have cost a carpenter, a few weeks' wages.
Yeah.
So it's like having a Mercedes or a Ferrari or something. If you take off the logo, people might just think it's
A regular car.
Yeah, So I think that was for theft deterrent, but also there was 3 different names with 3 different surnames on this saw. So this saw was owned and cared for by 3 separate carpenters over the course of its life.
Jesus.
So that just tells you how much these people cared and looked after their tools. This was an
Yeah.
absolute breadwinner. Like, this saw is what provided these people a living for their family. Versus now we've got, a Baco 224 saw that costs us 20 quid. We use it for a week until it goes blunt and then we throw it
Yeah.
out.
But even almost more so than the kind of the care that went into it, you can only imagine 3 carpenters throughout a lifetime, the amount of projects that must have been undertaken. I mean, even with the best of care, something would have to be built incredibly well to last that long. And the fact that you're now, in 2025, still using a tool like that, do you know around when that was made?
I think that was 1860s.
So, like, almost coming up on 200 years
Yeah.
of use. It's insane. I mean, it's crazy to think that, like, if you're in your 60s woodworking and you still have that saw, the saw that you're using to cut the wood, the handle of it might be as old as the tree you're cutting down. Like,
Yeah.
and we had actually in a job that I worked in previous, it was like an old estate, and we had a man come in, and he said that his father had been the groundskeeper for the area, and he just came up with a van, and the back of it was just filled to the brim with rusty tools, and it was all the ones that his father had. And he had this one thing, you'll know the name of it because I don't, but it was a big, huge, it must have been about a 20-foot long saw with a handle on each side, and it was for cutting down like large trees. And it was obviously had not been maintained very well, but one of the gardeners kind of knew a little bit about vintage tools, and he guessed that it was from around the late 1800s. And he was saying that even though it's covered in rust and anything, 2 days of work or something like that, and that could be cutting down trees the next day. And I couldn't believe that. Like the age of the tool, the kind of disrepair in it, and it was still able to be working.
Yeah, I think you're talking about a crosscut saw.
I think so.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they're
yeah.
torture. But no, it shows like a saw right would have been a whole craft in itself.
Yeah.
A fella whose whole life has been spent learning how to make saws really well, and then crafting and sharpening saws. And it speaks to this time as well before planned obsolescence. Where things were made and put out into the world, and whoever was buying them expected them to be well made and last. Versus now, where we've got our power tools might last 5 years, and then we'll just throw them out and buy a new one.
Yeah. One of the videos that you posted on YouTube that I was a huge fan of was the one of the stone wall builders. So obviously your kind of craft is the woodworking, but that's not your kind of only interest. You're interested in crafts in general. Can you tell me a little bit about, if anyone hasn't seen that video, could you give a little synopsis of it?
So a year ago, I used to rent a workshop, and it was on an estate owned by a man who was doing a lot of renovations at the time. So he had hired this stonemason, and he had his apprentice, and they were working on a stone wall just across from where my workshop was. So I asked anyway if I could kind of document their progress as the wall was building up. So it was really fascinating to see, them picking stones out of a big pile of rubble, to get the kind of nice corners and the nice facing stones, and then the lower quality stones that would be used for the hearting, filling in the wall, and then to, you know, meticulously place them in and mix their lime mortar, and just to see how much time and effort was put into building this lovely stone wall. You know, they could have had a block wall up in a fraction of the time, but of course it was nice to see, you know, someone with the money to be able to afford to have the stone wall built do the right thing and respect the farmyard and replace the stone wall with a stone wall. So it was kind of, I wanted to document kind of a remnant of an almost dead craft in this country. There's no proper new stone walls being built anymore, really. You know, it's too expensive, it takes too long. So I thought I was very lucky to have it happening outside my workshop door, and I felt the need to record and share the story of it.
And obviously you were recording it to kind of keep that tradition kind of locked away, like, but the other thing wasn't it that one of them was kind of a master stone worker and then the other one was being trained in it? Do you kind of find that this person, the person who's been practicing this trade for a long time, is obviously passing down the skills to the younger person? Do you find a little bit that you feel that you might be the person who's in the future going to be passing down the skills that you're building at the moment? Do you feel a kind of almost a responsibility to learn as much as you can so that it doesn't die?
Absolutely. I think for a long time, from what I've heard anyway from stories, is that anyone who had good knowledge on a certain craft or trade was scared to tell young people, especially those who weren't related to them, the secrets, the tricks of their trade, out of fear that they'd be outcompeted.
Yeah.
You know, but that's to blame for a lot of the decline in crafts. But I don't think it exists anymore. Anyone who I've talked to that's still doing a traditional craft, you know, they're really passionate about it, they want to see it prosper, and they're willing to share any information they have, which is great. So I think, yes, it's my job and anyone else who's woodworking, it's our job to soak up as much information as we can so that we can document it and share it for prosperity for the next generations.
I suppose the best example of you not gatekeeping it is the kind of the work you were doing last summer in Bunratty, where you were very much on display, kind of showing the skills that you've built up. If anybody didn't see that, would you be able to give us kind of an overview of that summer?
Yes, so last summer, myself and a friend of mine, James O'Connor, who's a blacksmith, we were given a 5-month residency in the courtyard of Bunratty Castle, which is it's now a tourist attraction in the County Clare. So we had a constant flow of people who were entering the park, and sooner or later they'd walk into the castle courtyard and they'd see myself and James going about our business. So we collaborated on a lot of projects, you know. He was a blacksmith, so he could make metal implements, like, let's say, an axe head, and I'd carve the handle. We collaborated a lot on kind of traditional replicas, and it was brilliant to be able to not just share what the work we were doing and our knowledge with the people visiting Bunratty over the course of the summer, but also we made these short form pieces of content together under the boys of Bunratty. So that was quite a successful series on both of our channels, and it was just brilliant to see such interest in it. Like, after the videos kind of took off, there was people travelling to Bunratty specifically to pop in and say hello, and just the people we met and the things we learned, it was just a phenomenal experience.
And people were kind of like giving you gifts, and you were doing the same. You were making kind of little like trinkets out of wood and metal and handing them out, and like for a lot of people that might be their first time interacting with like a handcrafted piece of art. Like, it might be their first time holding something that they can point at the person who made it. Like, did you see kind of people experience that feeling of realizing that this was made by the person in front of them?
Absolutely. And I think a lot of young people watching are then inspired to go and do that. Like, one of the nicest things that happened a couple of times over the course of the summer was that people, having seen the videos online, would bring us in gifts that they had made. So, like, take for example a young lad who had made his first ever mallet, or maybe someone who's done a sketch or a drawing of us working. You know, it was lovely to think that maybe we might be inspiring the next generation of crafters.
Yeah. I always kind of felt, if I was scrolling through TikTok and I saw one of the the Boys of Bunratty videos, it was almost like if someone travelled back in time and gave like a medieval craftsperson a TikTok account, because it was just these two young lads, one in a flat cap, crafting away over an anvil, and one lad carving the handles. And it was like, it was an interesting thing to see something typically seen as a kind of an aged out craft becoming almost like trendy. Like it was,
Yes,
it was a big thing.
That's an interesting way of putting it. And I think that's how we have to frame our traditional crafts. You have to make them cool.
Yeah.
You have to make them sexy and appealing for young people. And I think that is starting to happen. I think young people now want to be able to make things with their hands and be able to have something to show and hold for their day's work, and be able to say to people, look, I've done this, I've learned this craft and I've made this thing.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing that now with nature as well, where like it is becoming, like you said, it's becoming cool. It's becoming like the thing you kind of want to know how to do. So like there's influencers now who their whole identity is, you know, being in the countryside, foraging and growing their own food. And like you were saying, it's to be able to have something that at the end of the day you can, you know, you can hold a basket of carrots saying I grew these from seed. You can eat food that came from your garden. And I think that it's the same thing is happening with the kind of traditional crafts, where there's so much stuff where, like, you know, AI can paint a picture in 2 seconds, but you didn't put any work in. So even though you have I suppose a result, if you want to call it that, there was no inputs. So do you find that you've got a bit of job security there? There's never going to be AI carving wood.
Like I was talking to a friend, his name is Jack Pinson, and he's a bowyer. He goes under Living Longbows. But last weekend we were working a craft show together, and we were talking about how we should be very bulletproof for AI, because not only he was turning bowls, which was a job made completely obsolete as soon as you had affordable porcelain, and now people are still buying his bowls not because they need a bowl, but because they admire
The craft.
somebody who's keeping a craft alive, and they want to support that. So I think he'll be okay going forward. Yeah.
And then this is kind of the wrap-up question, and it's a question that I ask to every guest. So it's just it's a fairly simple question, but some people find it hard to answer. And it's, where is your favourite place in the outdoors? And it can be as broad as like a habitat. It could be a forest or a beach or a mountain, or it can be a really specific location.
As well as building a currach, over lockdown I obsessed over the historical map viewer. I think geohive.ie is the website, and I was scavenging my locality for old stone buildings, and I found one anyway in a little bit of a woodland, and I messaged a friend and said, come here, we'll check this out. And upon arrival it was just a stone ruin, but we thought, geez, wouldn't this be a great place to drink? So it was lockdown, all the pubs were closed, and we were bringing people into this little woodland. We were lighting campfires, and we had this little kind of this den we were building, and obviously the pubs reopened, and that kind of faded away. But I still visit that woodland very regularly. It was oak woodland planted in 2006, and it hasn't been managed since. So it's in need of a thinning and a pruning or whatever. But I live in a part of Cork that is very intensively farmed, huge dairy industry down there. So this is kind of an oasis. It's on land that's too steep to be, farmed. So it was planted, and I just love going there. It's only, a 5-minute walk from the house, so I can get there fairly easily, and it's lovely to be able to hear the bird song. There's a stream passing down below as well, so it's lovely just to go there to relax and just get in touch with nature.
I always find it amazing. A lot of people, their answer is similar to that, in that, not that it's specifically a forest, but it's one of the kind of little forgotten corners where farming couldn't reach. And I always think it's amazing to think that it wasn't too long ago that essentially the entire island was what you were describing, these kind of oak glens with, very little management or anything like that. And you're always a bit like, what they took from us,
Yeah, I remember I asked my mother recently, because she used to walk to school through a set of fields that was once loads of fields, but now it's kind of 2 fields that are both 100 acres in size. And they were cleared, all the hedgerows, in I think 1982 and 1983 to make way for large industrial farming. And I asked my mother, what was it like? Was there much louder bird song. She doesn't even remember, So I think it's easy to look back and romanticize. Oh, they had this. They probably lived much less comfortable lives than us. It was done out of necessity to make life easier at the time. So I don't think you can blame them, but it is a shame that we have lost that.
And I suppose that kind of example of your mother there is kind of like an example of the shift in baseline syndrome, where for her that was the norm, and then it kind of gets silenced out through the years. But then for you, that seems almost like a different world. Like
Absolutely.
this level of wildlife, this level of bird life just outside the door, which now, because of these enormous fields, just isn't there anymore. And I suppose then as well, is there anything coming up that people should know about, or where do you want to redirect people to see more of you?
Well, I think I'll use this chance to advertise the Gaelic Woodland project. I think
Okay.
they're a phenomenal organisation. If you're passionate in rewilding or Irish woodland or Irish language, definitely check them out and consider showing up to one of the volunteer days. They're great crack. You wouldn't even know you're working. You're having so much fun. You get to meet some really interesting people, and it's all for a great cause of making Ireland a more wild place with richer biodiversity for a better future. So check out their website, and I might see you at one of the next meetups next year.
Well, that's perfect. So thank you very much for coming on, Owen. I really appreciate it. And people can find you as Eoin Reardon everywhere, but they probably already know you, in fairness. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed listening to that episode as much as I enjoyed recording it. As I'm sure you can tell from listening in, Eoin is someone whose passion speaks for itself. His love of the tradition of Irish woodcrafting is quite infectious, and I have to say, I think I might try and find my spoon carving kit that I mentioned in that conversation. As Eoin mentioned in the ending of that episode, I would definitely recommend giving a follow of the Gaelic Woodland League and getting involved in some of their events. And in the spirit of sharing amazing people and amazing groups from around the country, I just thought I'd say that on this day, me and Eoin met as we were both attending a book release of the book Remnants of Our Past by Deirdre O'Neill. I'm sure if you have an interest in history or Ireland in general, you've probably come across the TikTok account Remnants of Our Past. If not, you may have seen a post of something interesting on the side of a country road or underneath a canal bridge with the caption, "We walk past remnants of our past every day without noticing." Deirdre has taken that idea from her TikTok and put it into a fantastic new book. Eoin started the event with a speech about what the book meant to him and about what history in general meant to him, which was followed by a fantastic speech from the author Deirdre. I highly recommend getting out to your local bookshop and trying to pick up a copy, if you can, from a small independent bookshop, but if not, I won't judge you too much, as it kind of goes into what we're talking about here, this idea of taking these Irish traditions, these crafts that may be dying, these ideas that may be dying, and preserving them for the future. It's something that, while not innately linked to nature, shares a lot of the same ideals. We plant a tree knowing that we may never sit under it, the same way that we hold an idea knowing that it may never be new to us. And aside from that, a big thank you to everybody. We recently hit 5,000 followers on TikTok, which is pretty incredible. It's honestly not a number I ever thought I'd reach. I've been trying to kind of spread the word of nature as much as possible for a long time, and I'm just so happy to see a large amount of people that are interested in hearing me babble on about trees. I've also got some really exciting projects coming up. You might have seen a camera in a few of my story posts and feed posts over the last few days. It's something that I'm really, really excited to announce, but in annoying kind of pseudo-influencer fashion, I can't talk about it just yet, but look out for the future. And look forward to, hopefully, more consistent podcast episodes. I do feel like I'm saying it at the end of every episode, but there is a plan in place now, so I hopefully will be getting the finger out and get a bit more consistent with the posting, because I really do love making these podcasts. I really do love talking to people about nature and hearing from you guys as well. So thank you so much for listening. And of course, try and get outside today.